Continuing production of The Open Mind has been made possible by grants from Ann Olnick Gumowitz, the Angelson Family Foundation, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, the Joan, Ganz, Cooney, and Peter G. Peterson Fund, the Rosalind P. Walter Foundation, the Joanne and Kenneth Wellner Foundation, Sally Minard and Norton Garfinkle, and from the corporate community, Mutual of America.
I'm Alexander Heffner, your host on The Open Mind. From its long-revered Darts and Laurels feature to its essays of criticism, Columbia Journalism Review has presided as the authoritative watchdog of the press. From classic debates about yellow journalism and media bias to burning issues of the day like consolidation, corporatization, and the great content convergence of this millennium, CJR has steered us toward fresh insight. And for that we're grateful to our guest today, its newest editor-in-chief and publisher, Elizabeth Spayd, a much-respected former managing editor of the Washington Post. Years ago, I had the good fortune of my first journalism education at CJR under the tutelage of longtime editor Mike Hoyt. Thus, the first ever entirely student-produced experimental issue caught my attention, as did Elizabeth's editor's note, encouraging us to pass the torch to the next generation, whose values, she says, are no different than her own. In that spirit, I wonder if we can open by exploring this hybrid mindset. How does it apply to the advent of drone journalism, to directly published articles on Facebook, what her students called the media's cutting edge? An open question, and welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
This cutting edge and the hybrid mindset that you accept this new generation has knowledge and perspective that's not necessarily possessed in the newsrooms across the country. How are you reconciling these attitudes?
Well, it's interesting. You know, I really didn't know what to expect when I was asked to teach this class. I'd gone in and taught a course, taught a particular session before, but I'd never had a whole course, so I didn't have a whole lot of experience with students that age or young journalists that age, and I was really surprised by how much they had this same, as you say, the same values that I had. I was surprised when they started doing the brainstorming and thinking about what they wanted to do with CJR. I had essentially said, do anything you want. I mean, it has to be about the subject of journalism, but what you want to make CJR, you can make it. And honestly, I was surprised that they weren't more out there in a way. I thought my job might be to rein them in a little bit, and it turned out my job was to goose them a little bit and say, come on, I'm not kidding, reins are off. And but I do think that they showed in this issue that they produced in print and online that they're much more interested in the front edge of journalism, you know, experimental journalism, whether it's because of some type of technology or because of a way of experiencing the actual journalism. And they all put together a top 11 list. It wasn't the top 10 list because they had sort of a BuzzFeed mode to them in picking an odd number. They all voted on the group they ultimately selected, and then wrote something up about what they thought was unique about what was happening among these 11 And they
11 innovations.
11 different innovations in journalism, right. And they weren't all digital native operations. Some of them were also, legacy places like the Des Moines Register. So it's good.
And when you say they share your values,
I would say it felt like we had relatively shared journalistic values, or ethics, that they cared whether something was really right or wrong or reported, which is not, when you look at a lot of websites that appeal to millennials, you don't necessarily see a lot of reporting or particularly original reporting behind what they're doing. So I was a little surprised by that. Now, they're not normal millennials. They're, journalists or aspiring journalists. And I did find that if there was a common weakness in some of the material that they produced, it was probably around reporting. But I think that a lot of that is sort of the age factor, that they're young and they're learning, and it takes a little moxie to get in the door of places or to get your phone calls answered. I don't think it's because they weren't trying, but.
And in the democratization of news and information that we've seen online, it was reported recently that the Columbia School of Journalism will be reducing the size of its enrollment. Do you think that the young people you interacted with would see that as clashing with their values of wanting to bring more people into this art? We obviously both recognize there's still woes in the media in terms of the bottom line.
I mean, I think that's an interesting question. I hadn't really thought about it in the way that you're presenting it. I appreciate the philosophy that's behind that reduction. The size of the journalism school has taken a real swing up around the recession because, as typically happens, more people go to school and they can't get jobs. So this is actually bringing that level back down to what has been the traditional norm of the school. And I think that the aim there is to get the school back to a place where it can really be an elite school and allow in the best of the best, and not, it had, as the enrollment already started to decline a little bit as the economy got better, you can't kind of keep this size of operation that was built for this size of a class at that same level. So I don't know what actually, I didn't hear any of them talk about that. So it is interesting what they felt about that. They because they're in journalism, they're probably used to, those kind of cutbacks, or if they're not, unfortunately, right, they're going to get used to them.
Well, a lot of people have spoken in the same way they did for decades about CJR. When they reflect on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, the most poignant media criticism has come from this magazine, and perhaps from the television set in the studio of The Daily Show.
Would love to think that. I hope that that's the case. The only thing I would say about that, I mean, when I came in, one of my strong values was that I felt like we are foremost here to hold the media accountable for the enormous power that they have. So I felt like we had drifted a little bit from that in the past couple of years. So that is very important to me. But the other thing that's important to me is not to do that like a jerk, basically, not to have too strong of an edge or a snarky voice. I'm not one to, promote a snarky voice. It's meant, the voice should be with the intent of making our profession better. So, I guess it depends on what people mean by that, but I hope it's,
Well, I say
I'll take it as a good thing.
I say that in furthering your analogy or looking at the passing of the torch in terms of getting more people to subscribe to this magazine, or the same number that would click a bite from The Daily Show. Yeah. What do you think, from being a veteran of a newspaper and having edited everything from the most classified national security stories to domestic affairs. What do you think today of the integration into the integration of news articles that are being directly published and disseminated on social media?
Well, I think that there could become a clash with that. I don't know that I see them as kind of in parallel right now, but I think that there's a lot of danger in taking what the New York Times or the Washington Post has produced, what they've developed, the journalism that they've developed with all their standards, and losing control of it in a way by publishing it on someone else's network where they too start to introduce their values. And I haven't seen anything in the relatively small amount of information and real detail that we've been given about what the terms of that transaction are. But I do think anytime you give somebody else, some other partner, that much control, that's not in your, they haven't grown up with your values. They have clearly not always publicly shared them. And it's,
it's a challenge not to have an editor.
Yeah, it's a challenge not to have an editor, and it's a challenge not to run your own press, even if it's in digital, right. And it's an act of desperation.
Well, is it your contention that operating out of a model that lacks that oversight is going to be dangerous for the next decade plus as more papers die?
It's going to be risky. I think it could be dangerous. I'm reluctant to doom it before it takes off, because, if I were still at the Washington Post, I'm sure I'd be weighing it seriously too. That it kind of reminds me, granted to a greater degree, but 5 or 8 years ago, we would have a lot of wringing of our hands over whether we ought to let other digital publishers take our content and do a blurb off it and then a link to us, and we felt like, why should they be stealing our content? But if we didn't let them steal our content, our traffic would really decline, because if we gave them too much grief about it, then they wouldn't point to us at all. So it reminds me of this. It's like it's like the lesser of two evils, and I do think there's dangers. There's dangers around press freedom.
The social media and newspapers are not playing necessarily by the same rules yet. Do you see CJR as a mediator in that conflict?
I would hope so. I don't think that there should be a unified standard for that. I think individual news organizations ought to set their own standards. I feel like that is part of our democracy and part of what the fourth estate should be. There ought not to be any organization or group vote about, how those standards should be met. But I do see CJR being a voice of light in that, and making strong arguments for how organizations should come down on those values. When the Charlie Hebdo incident arose, and a lot of prominent publications weren't publishing, any of those cartoons, we stood up and said, made a case for why that is wrong and a little spineless. So I think that definitely is a space we want to be in.
Well, the feature that was beloved for so many decades that I referred to in the opening was laurels and darts, and darts and laurels, as you corrected me. The spirit of that continues on as you grapple with so many of the issues facing the Fourth Estate now. Reflecting on your tenure, and we're recording in the spring, this will air over the summer, what's been the greatest laurel, and the laurel being accolade, dart being criticism, since you took over the magazine?
Oh boy, that's a good one. I'm terrible at recalling all of those. If I could line them up, I might pick differently. But I'll tell you one that comes to mind, which was
because it
fairly recently.
Like a dart is an insult, and you.
Well, dart, I can do that easily. I can do that one easily. The laurel is,
right.
If I start with the laurel, that one.
Because you could read the whole Polk Awards and Pulitzers, but
yeah, there's been
in terms
an
of
enormous
trends,
amount
right.
of great journalism. A recent one was this piece that the New York Times did on the nail salons. I thought that was just a great example of incredibly hard shoe leather reporting, going around to all these nail salons to look at the kinds of conditions that the workers were facing, in some cases not even being paid and subjected to all kinds of chemicals, and then interpreting, working through interpreters on that, and then the New York Times publishing it in all these different languages. I just thought that was both a tool of the modern day to be able to do that, but also the kind of local reporting that we often hear about, and it's true that seems to be in decline. So that's a recent one that comes to mind. There's been, a lot of great journalism. There's a lot of great journalism clearly around Snowden and all that's come out since then.
Dart.
A dart? Okay. Yes. Rolling Stone. I just felt like that was pretty abysmal for an organization, particularly that has the means to stop that level of error and mistake to get published. They have fact checkers there. They have multi-layer editing. They have reporters who can work on something for months. They have
Give our viewers a snapshot of how this transpired.
Well, they had a writer, a reporter who'd been worked for Rolling Stone for a long time, who had worked on other publications. She had been working for a while on a piece going out and talking to different women around the country focused on campus rape and campus sexual assault. She ended up having her focus drawn. I don't remember how exactly she got to this woman, but a woman at University of Virginia. She, as it developed, she ended up building a story that was largely around this woman's narrative about how she got sexually assaulted at a fraternity party. Takes it to her editors. There's some effort to fact check, to try to get to other students that might know something about this, but it wasn't at a very significant level, and it clearly wasn't at a level to allow them to discover that this woman's story was very dubious. And it's possible that something happened that night, but nothing close to what the account in Rolling Stone said.
Was the most abysmal thing the editor's note? I mean, even beyond...
that too, exactly. Yeah. Once they did, first round of
they retreated, but really didn't retract.
They retreated and didn't retract, and they essentially blamed the woman,
right,
instead of their own behavior, their own lack of appropriate editing and oversight.
The Washington Post operated a little bit different during the Watergate era, and Katharine Graham would not have stood for that kind of editorial malfunction at such a high level.
I would hope not. I seriously doubt.
And CJR and the school, in cooperation with the investigators here, were commissioned to produce a report on what went so terribly wrong.
Yes, that's right.
And what from that, what did you think? What did you deduce ultimately went so terribly wrong?
Well, I have spent my life as an editor, but so maybe this impacts how I view this, but I primarily blame the editors for not, like, you're never in a good space when you have and I'm sympathetic to this, but you have a good reporter who's been extremely reliable in the past. They've produced some great journalism for your publication, and it's very tempting to think, if they're telling me this, then it must be right. If your head's ever doing that, time to stop and slow down and ask more questions. And obviously some of the fault is with this reporter. She had the same... she got caught in a similar kind of psychological spin in a way where she wanted to believe this woman. And the more you want to believe, the more you do believe, and the less you find the need to go check it because you're sure of what you have. So I'd say 75% on the editors and 25% on her.
Well, it reminds me of a dart from a decade plus earlier when Judith Miller was scapegoated, but it was Jill Abramson and others who were the editors. Yeah.
I think that there are parallels to that. The Judith Miller was a little murkier, just in, I don't think this is an excuse for it, but there was sort of the fog of war at that time. It was difficult, like all of us, including the Washington Post, got bamboozled by the administration and intelligence sources, leading us to believe that they had a lot of confidence that there were weapons of mass destruction. So it wasn't like they were alone on this, in the same way that the Rolling Stone was, but they're the same issues of how much checking and how much questioning went on.
Do you think that retreat, in a pretty immediate retreat after the Washington Post, I think was largely responsible for exposing the error of the reporter? Do you think that they were threatened, that the university or the fraternity threatened to sue them to oblivion if they didn't act? Is that how this escalated?
I have little doubt, I do not know, but I have little doubt that the Rolling Stone was especially motivated by legal concerns, and they've certainly proven right. They're dealing with legal battles now.
And one of the things I want to, we're running out of time, but I want to talk a little bit about empathy, because you mentioned that in this case it was misplaced. In your vision for CJR in the future, because in the last couple of issues you talk about the intersection of reporting and empathy, how can we look at that in a way that's going to give us new insight so that we can avoid situations like Rolling Stone?
I mean, I think empathy is one of the great purposes that journalism has, to create empathy in readers. That's what we ought to be doing with a large amount of what we do, help readers get drawn into other people's circumstances and other people's lives and issues that they don't care about, but that we want them to care about. So I think that kind of empathy is a good thing, but the kind of empathy that is dangerous is when you are so strongly associating with someone whose feelings you care about that you don't want to, pull back and evaluate what they're saying.
You do miss Washington a bit, but I'm wondering how you're going to bring that vibe of the newsroom. And we said, I was there at one point too. How are you bringing that to New York? Because I think that the culture you were a part of news gathering can really enlighten these students with whom you're working. Is there anything that you're hoping that your students in New York and the culture of the journalism school and the magazine can gain from your 20 years approximately at the Washington Post?
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I would say that pretty immediately one of the things that I changed at CGR is trying to make it feel more like a newsroom. And We have a 10 a.m. meeting every day where we talk about what's going on. You know, we're trading emails all the time about different things that we're seeing and whether there's something there for us to, you know, hop on. I'm trying to make this much more timely. Mm-hmm. I feel like CJR had moved into a place that was a little more academic and ponderous and kind of, you know, a little bit too much focus on the word review. Like, you know, we'll step back and in due time we'll render, you know, an opinion on this digital thing. I'm being silly, but I'm trying to get away from that. I feel like the world moves much more quickly, and CJR needs to move much more.
Well,
quickly.
You're moving quickly, and we didn't really talk about this in depth, but drone journalism is a thing, and maybe it can counteract the malevolence of drones being used for more conniving and militaristic means. What do you think about this? And your students wrote about unmanned vehicles that could expose things where a security guard is going to be obstructing you from getting the truth.
I think there's lots of interesting issues there. I find that right now it's overregulated. I feel like the media ought to have some rights to use drones. I wrote an editorial for that issue about how you know, absurd I thought it was that the FAA is making what are essentially our First Amendment decisions about where the media ought to be able to go with those. Obviously, we ought not to put anyone in dangerous situations. They shouldn't be flown too low over a public park, or, you know, certainly there's, you know, a lot of reasonable ways to manage that, but right now I feel like there's too much of a freak out about it.
Well, on that note, maybe we can drone into the U.S. Supreme Court, and that will be the camera that opens the minds to the American judiciary. But it's a great thought to leave us on. So thank you, Liz Spayd, for your time today. And thanks to you in the audience. I hope you join us again next time for a thoughtful excursion into the world of ideas. Until then, keep an open mind. Please visit the Open Mind website at 13.org/openmind to view this program online or to access over 1,500 other Open Mind interviews. And do check us out on Twitter and Facebook at Open Mind TV for updates on future programming.
Continuing production of The Open Mind has been made possible by grants from Anne Olnick Gumowitz, the Angelson Family Foundation, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, the Joan, Ganz, Cooney and Peter G. Peterson Fund, the Rosalind P. Walter Foundation, the Joanne and Kenneth Wellner Foundation, Sally Minard and Norton Garfinkle, with special thanks to the Schumann Media Center for additional support, and from the corporate community, Mutual of America.